Hello everyone, welcome to the State Monogastric Nutrition Podcast. I'm Jimena Ibagon, and today I will share with you data of one of the experiments we conducted at the University of Illinois titled Soybean Oil Equivalency of Soybean Meal in Diets Fed to Growing Pigs. To begin with, I would like to give you a small introduction of why we decided to conduct this experiment. And first, let me tell you that soybean meal is the primary plant protein source of swine diets in the United States. The amino acid profile of soybean meal is well balanced, and it complements the amino acid profile of grains such as corn, wheat, or another energy sources to formulate balanced diets. However, we know that energy is the most expensive component in swine diets, and lipids are often included in diets for pigs due to their energy content, and also we know that when we include lipids in the diets, we also improve growth performance and gain to feed ratio of the pigs. But in the same time, we increase the cost of the diet, and that will give the producer a low profit. Therefore, accuracy in the determination of energy value of ingredients is necessary to evaluate the trade-off between the growth performance and the cost of the diet. The net energy of soybean meal has been reported to be 2,087 kilocalories per kilogram, which is only 78% of the corn energy value. However, recent research shows improvements in feed efficiency by increasing the levels of soybean meal in the diet. In this experiment, conducted by Holland and others in 2022, they increased the inclusion of soybean meal from 0 to 8 and 60% at the expenses of corn. These diets were well balanced for all nutrients and amino acids as the NRC requires, and they observed that the gain to feed of late finishing pigs will increase as the soybean meal will increase in the diet. This indicates that the soybean meal contributes more energy to the diets than the average reported. This experiment, however, was conducted in commercial conditions. So this one was just one experiment that reported that the productive energy of soybean meal was greater than the book values. Therefore, the objective of this experiment was to obtain a regression equation to predict the fat equivalency value of soybean meal based on different levels of dietary soybean oil added to the diets. So now let's move on to the materials and methods that we used to conduct this experiment. We used a total of 120 growing pigs with an average body weight of 24 kilograms. And we randomly allotted these animals to 5 dietary treatments with 2 pigs per pen, 1 barrow, and 1 gill for a total of 12 replicate pens per treatment. And those pigs were fed the diets for a total of 4 weeks. The diets that we used to conduct this experiment were the following. We formulate a basal diet based on corn, soy protein concentrate, and synthetic cellulose. We use synthetic cellulose because we know that synthetic cellulose will not contribute any metabolizable or net energy to the diet, so we use it as a filler. This diet will not contain soybean oil. However, this diet was formulated to meet all the amino acid and energy requirements based on the NRC. We formulate 3 more diets, and those diets include 2, 4, or 6% of soybean oil at the expenses of the synthetic cellulose. So with this, we have 4 equal diets, but with the difference that we have the inclusion of 0, 2, 4, or 6% of soybean oil in these diets. Then we formulate the last diet that was based on corn, soy protein concentrate, and we replace the 12% of synthetic cellulose by 12% of soybean meal. This diet contains no soybean oil for a total of 5 dietary treatments that all meet the NRC requirements for amino acids and energy for growing pigs based on the NRC. The length of the experiment, as I mentioned, was 28 days. The individual pig weights were recorded at the beginning of the experiment and at the conclusion of the experiment. Feed addition was recorded at the time that was added during the whole experiment, and the weight of the feed left in the feeder was recorded at the conclusion of the experiment. At the end of the 20-day experiment, data collected for the pig weights and the feed allowance were summarized, and we used it to calculate total feed consumption, average daily gain, average daily feed intake, and gain to feed ratio for each pen and each treatment group. Data were analyzed using the mixed procedure of SAS with the pen as the experimental unit. Linear and quadratic effects of increasing soybean oil concentration were determined, and we developed a regression equation for the estimation of the feed efficiency as soybean oil was increasing in the diet. diets. This regression equation was only for the soybean oil diets. Using the developed equation, we calculate the soybean oil level in the diet containing soybean meal, and that will give us an equivalency of the contribution of energy of the soybean meal to the diet. Now let's move on to the growth performance results, which is the first part of this experiment. But first, I would like to set up my slides. You can see in the columns from the dark blue to the light blue, the diets containing soybean oil from 0 to 6%, and in orange, you can see the diet containing 12% of soybean meal, but not soybean oil. We can observe that the average daily feed intake had a linear and quadratic decrease as soybean oil increased in the diets. And this was expected because as we add more oil to the diets, the energy will increase and therefore the intake will decrease. But we can observe that there is no difference between the diet containing no soybean meal and no soybean oil in the average daily feed intake. Now let's talk about the average daily gain of the pigs. We observed that the average daily gain had a quadratic increase as soybean oil increased in the diets. And we observed that those pigs that were fed the diet containing 12% of soybean meal had a greater average daily gain than those that were fed the diet containing no soybean meal or not soybean oil. On the other hand, the gain-to-feed ratio of pigs had a linear increase as soybean oil increased in the diets. And these results were expected because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the addition and the increase in the inclusion of lipids to the diets will increase the feed efficiency of the pigs. We can also observe that pigs fed the diet with the addition of 12% of soybean meal and no soybean oil had a greater gain-to-feed ratio compared with those fed the diet that contains no soybean meal and no soybean oil. And the conclusion of this first part of this presentation is that when we add soybean meal to the diets that are balanced in amino acids and meets the requirements for amino acids for growing pigs, we can improve the average daily gain of the pigs and the feed efficiency, but the intake will not change. Now let's move on to the results of the soybean oil equivalency. Here you can observe that the gain-to-feed ratio will linearly increase as we add soybean oil to the diets, and that is what we expected because we took that synthetic cellulose out of the diet that not contribute any energy, and we add a high energy ingredient, in this case soybean oil, to the 3 different diets. And we expect the gain-to-feed increase. So that happens. So now based on that linear regression that we obtain, we can indicate how much of the gain-to-feed increase per unit of soybean oil that we add to the diet. So this equation that I'm showing you here demonstrates that our intercept is 0.468. So if there is not fat in the diet, we will have a gain-to-feed ratio of 0.47. But for each percent of unit of fat that we add to the diet, we increase the gain-to-feed by 0.013. So after that, we plotted the soybean meal values of the gain-to-feed in this graph, and we obtained a gain-to-feed of 0.53 from the soybean meal diet. And based on this equation, we calculate that the soybean meal contributes the same amount of energy as we have gotten from 4.70% of soybean oil. Therefore, the equivalency of 12% of soybean meal is 4.70% of soybean oil from an energy point of view. But what does it mean? Well, if we assume that soybean oil contains 7,545 kilocalories per kilogram of net energy reported by the NRC, we calculate that 4.70% of soybean oil will contribute 35,400 kilocalories per kilogram more or less, which is the equivalency of 12% of soybean meal. And that will indicate us that in 1 kilogram of soybean meal, we will have 2,955 kilocalories per kilogram of net energy. However, it is important to mention that this is not net energy because we did not take into account any changes in body composition or any other parameter to measure net energy. This is only based on gain to feed. But doing this calculation based on gain to feed, we get the value for net energy in soybean meal of 2,900 kilocalories per kilogram more or less. And that is a lot of more of the energy that is reported in the NRC or in other book values. However, there has been other experiments and data that reported the net energy value of soybean meal using the gain to feed ratio as we did in this experiment, but under commercial conditions. And the reported values that they obtained were a maximum value, which was 3,300 kilocalories per kilogram of net energy, and a minimum value of 2,800 kilocalories per kilogram of net energy in soybean meal. And the value that we obtained at the University of Illinois is in good agreement with the values previously reported when gain to feed was used to estimate net energy. But again, these values are not net energy since we cannot take change of body composition of the pigs into account. However, it's very well known that when net energy in soybean meal has been determined using indirect calorimetry, it has been confirmed that there is more energy in soybean meal than NRC has indicated. Here you can observe two experiments that reports the net energy in dry matter basis, which is a little bit greater than the value that we saw before. And we see that the net energy directly estimated by indirect calorimetry give us a higher values than the NRC value. So with that, we conclude that the productive energy of soybean meal is around of 110% of the corn energy, or around 2,955 kilocalories per kilogram. And this may indicate that we get more energy from soybean meal than we previously expected. So with this data, we came up with some conclusions, and the first one is that the productive energy of soybean meal is around of 110% of corn energy, or 2,900 kilocalories per kilogram. And this may indicate that we get more energy from soybean meal than we previously expected. With that, I would like to thank the United Soybean Board for the funding of this project and the State Monogastric Nutrition Group for the collaboration in conducting this experiment. And if you have any question or more interest in the research that we conducted in the State Monogastric Nutrition Laboratory, please go to the website nutrition.nc.illinois.edu. Thank you so much and see you next time.